And without further ado, I am so happy to introduce today's facilitators, Armando Molina Gomez and Violet King from the University of Hawaii.
Hi everyone. We're very excited to be with you here today. We're going to be presenting on kind of an introduction to language revitalization. So Armando, could you go to the next slide and we can introduce ourselves? So my name is Violet King. I'm a grad student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm from Arizona and I am joining you today from Yavapai Apache lands in Arizona. And I'm one of the co-directors for the Language Documentation Training Center, which is co-hosting this workshop series. And we're a student organization founded in 2004 that runs community workshops kind of like this on different topics in language revitalization and documentation to help people who want to document their own languages. And Armando?
Thank you, Violet, and thank you, Anna. My name is Armando Molina Gomez. I'm also a graduate student, a PhD student in the Department of Linguistics at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Last year, I was the graduate assistant for the Kaipulehone Language Archive, and I am a frequent participant in LDTC workshops. I'm originally from Granada in the south of Spain, and I am joining from Hawaii.
Oh, and sorry, a brief introduction to what I do as my work in the
Oh,
department.
yes.
I forgot that, sorry. I have worked with Desano in the past, which is a language on the border of Colombia and Brazil. Uh, I'm currently working with Micronesian languages, especially Koshayan and Cook Islands Maori.
And I work especially with helping to create documentation and revitalization materials for Palauan diaspora here in Hawaii, and also in Hawaiian language theater, supporting Hawaiian language theater. And my hope is to keep helping out and learning from different experience on indigenous medium, indigenous language theater across the world later in my career.
Awesome. Could we go to the next slide, please? So today we're going to start with giving a basic introduction to what language revitalization is and related terms like language reclamation that you might have heard. We're going to talk about how to get involved in language revitalization, what it takes to learn a language, and then we're going to go through some examples of methods of language revitalization like mentor-apprentice, immersion schools, and then talk about how you can find funding for these projects. So, language revitalization is often discussed as just creating new speakers or helping speakers improve their language skills. Basically, it's just increasing speaker numbers. But that's kind of a simplistic view of what language revitalization can be. It also encompasses any efforts to strengthen or promote a language that's experiencing or at risk of language shift. So, language shift is when speakers of a language or a community that traditionally speaks a language starts to switch to speaking a different language, usually a dominant language promoted by the government. Um, so, language revitalization can encompass any effort that's meant to address that language shift, including helping people use the language more, creating spaces for people to use the language more. So, for example, maybe people only speak it at home. So, part of language revitalization is creating community centers or school settings or different places, artistic spaces where people can use the language in more locations. And it's also promoting the rights, support, and awareness for a language. So that could be something like advocating against discrimination in government against speakers of an indigenous language. Or it could be hosting theater productions in a language or putting signs out in a local language. So if you can go to the next slide. There are some related terms you might have heard to language revitalization. So one is language maintenance and conservation. So this is working with at-risk languages, especially children, to ensure that the language remains used in a variety of domains. So this is often the term used when we're talking about communities that are starting to experience language shift. Children are starting to use their traditional language less, but that process isn't very advanced yet. So it's just about keeping the speaker numbers, keeping people using the indigenous or traditional language. Another term you might have heard is language reclamation. And this is similar to language revitalization, except that it really focuses on decolonization and insider perspectives on a language. So this term was first put out there by Wesley Leonard, who is a linguist and Miamia speaker. And it's really in reaction to a lot of unethical practices by linguists working in language revitalization who tend to view language as an object to be dissected. And so he was working against that perspective and saying, no, we should be viewing language as a holistic thing in our lives and in our communities. And look at how speakers view their own language and how we can incorporate that into our language revitalization efforts. The next one you might have heard is language renormalization. So this is about making a language visible in public life. And this is part of what Armando does with theater. So this could be putting out signs in a language. It could be making sure ceremonies include speakers of a language in them. Um, Anything like that. That's just showing people that a language is still alive and present in a community. The next is language work. This is a very general term. I really like this term. And it encompasses any activity by any person who is active in language revitalization or reclamation that is being done to promote a language. So that can include activism, it can include poetry or art, and it can include teaching a language. It can even include learning a language, can be part of language work. We go to the next slide. All of these terms are kind of getting at this point that language revitalization shouldn't just be about language. Most people who are trying to learn their heritage language are not doing it just because they think the language is cool. They're doing it because the language relates to some element of their culture and their identity that it's very important. So in addition to just increasing speaker numbers, a good language revitalization project is also going to be considering how that language connects to identity, culture, community, ancestors, and land, and how that can improve and benefit speakers and members of the community. And it's also going to be thinking about well-being. It's actually been proven in a number of studies that people, especially in an Indigenous community who know their language or are learning their language, experience a number of physical and mental health benefits. So this is another benefit to the community that you're working with or your own community as you engage in a language revitalization project. So on the next slide, we have a quote here. And this is from that paper I talked about earlier by Wesley Leonard that promotes language reclamation. And this is a quote by a language activist, artist, and speaker, Elle Frank, who is part of the Tongva community in California. And she says, language is the basket that holds all of our culture. In order to understand why this oak tree sitting on a hilltop is so critical to my afterlife, the language is the only thing that explains that and carries that and is that. I need the language to understand. I don't want to take a wrong road when I get to the edge of the land of the dead. So language is pretty much everything. And this quote kind of encompasses, oh, sorry. This quote kind of encompasses why language revitalization is so important. Language can hold so much more than just grammar structures. It can hold so much importance to identity, to a community. And it's also important when you're engaging in a language revitalization project to not just be approaching this from a linguistics perspective. You should also be looking at how does your own community or the community you're working with engage with their own language? How do they perceive their own language? What value do they see in it? And how can that be meaningfully incorporated into a language revitalization project so that the project is best serving the needs, interests, and perspectives of the people who that language belongs to. So on the next slide, so if you're just getting started in language revitalization, it can feel very overwhelming, the amount of work that has to be done. So it's important to recognize that you're not alone. The field of language revitalization is growing and there are so many resources available. You are not starting from zero if you're starting a language revitalization project. There's many people who have done the same thing before. There's so many resources out there for you to use and get started with. And to demonstrate how the global community is viewing language revitalization as more important, this decade UNESCO declared as the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. So they're trying to provide more resources available to people who are trying to engage in this kind of work. But it is so important that you get started as soon as possible, because there are 7,000 languages in the world and almost half of them are endangered. The situation is only getting worse, unfortunately, because colonization is not over. It's continuing. Globalization is continuing to threaten languages and communities around the world. So it's important that you get started as soon as you can. Um, but when you're getting started, there's a number of things to consider about your positionality. First off, does the revitalization project already exist? Um, if it does already exist, who is involved in it? Is there a university involved, researchers, local or tribal government, schools, community centers, national government organizations, non-government organizations? If they're not involved, would they be useful? Can you get them involved somehow? So ELP, for example, is a non-government organization that can help support the kinds of language work you might be doing or is beginning in your community. And then where do you fit into that sphere? Are you part of a university? Are you part of the local government? Are you a teacher? Do you work for a community center? Are you an activist? There's a lot of different roles you can play that are necessary within a revitalization project beyond just linguist and speaker. So think about, are you an insider to this community or are you an outsider? That's going to affect the kind of leadership role you can have in the project. Or you might be an insider outsider. You might be a member of this community, but you grew up far away from them. So it's important to recognize the kind of expertise you are bringing to the project versus the kind of expertise the other people engaged are bringing, and how you can respect everyone else's contributions. Are you a speaker? Are you a learner? Are you a linguist? Are you an activist? If you're an activist, your role might be getting funding from the government for your language project. Or it might be reducing language discrimination or allowing the government to let you teach your language in schools. If you're a learner, that could just be your job, to learn the language as well as you can and pass it on to your children. If you're a speaker, your role might be to develop teaching materials, or it might be to be a teacher, or it might be to be recorded so that you can share your language with future generations. There's all kinds of different roles you can share, and it's important to think about the skills you have and how you can bring that to the project. So we've linked here the Linguist Code of Conduct. If you're an outsider linguist especially, this is an important thing to review to make sure that you're engaging respectfully with any community that you're working with. Um, but one of the most important things when you're getting started with a language revitalization project, or even continuing one, is to think about what does it take to learn a language? The main goal of language revitalization is to produce speakers, I guess, even though it can go far beyond that. So what does it actually take to learn a language? A lot of people are quite unclear about this. So on the next slide, um, here's the answer to that question. It is input. Input is what it takes to learn a language. You need to hear the language as much as you can. You need to speak it as much as you can. But unfortunately, a lot of people kind of take language learning for granted. It seems like this miraculous thing that children are able to do. But that's actually not true. Children don't learn a language miraculously. They learn it because they receive so much input. So there's a really commonly cited and commonly simplified figure from this 1997 paper about bilingualism that a child, or an adult even, needs at least 25% of their input to come from the target language in order to acquire it. But what this figure actually means, this author, Pearson, found that bilingual children who heard 20% or less in one of their languages wouldn't speak that language. Even if they could understand it, they were reluctant or would refuse to speak it. And I think that's a concept that might be familiar to a lot of people here about silent speakers, people who can understand but can't speak the language. So actually, you need a lot of input to acquire a language. A child isn't learning the language miraculously. They need complex and interesting input, an adult too. So, for example, a language revitalization program that is teaching a language class for 1 hour per day in school isn't really going to reach that 25% of input necessary to learn a language. And what we do know, we don't know a lot, honestly, about how someone acquires a language. There's a lot unknown. But some things we do know. First is that an adult or a child needs so much input, preferably from multiple speakers, which I recognize is not possible in every language situation, and on many topics. So if you're just hearing from your teacher in a classroom, you're only getting a limited set of topics and you're only getting it from one speaker. So that's not going to be enough usually for a child or an adult learner to fully acquire the language. The next thing we know is that children do learn languages better than adults. This doesn't mean that an adult can't learn the language, but children have that neuroplasticity that allows them to acquire it quickly. But that neuroplasticity also means that they can lose the language quickly. So if a child knows a language at 6, that does not guarantee that they will know the language for the rest of their lives. Generally, they have to know the language until age 12 in order to keep it into adulthood. So the work is not done if your child speaks your language at 6. The next thing we know is that some kinds of input are better than others. Simple commands are not going to be enough. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of young children and people in the classroom hear are just commands. Sit down, pick that up, bring that over here. And they'll learn that. But if that's all they're hearing, they're not going to learn how to form complex sentences, complex ideas, or hold conversations. So it's important to ask learners questions, elaborate on what they say, and use really complex structures. So for example, if a learner says, "Look, dog," instead of saying dog, you could respond with, "Yes, that is a dog. That's a big brown dog. I like dogs. Do you like dogs?" And now they're getting all these different kinds of sentences, all these new kinds of words that are building on what they said. And then the final thing that we know is that children and adults are really sensitive to language ideologies. They notice and they care what languages their peers speak, what languages are represented where, and what they see in media. So, an important part of language revitalization is creating role models who speak the language, both fictional and real, so that people can see their language is cool, their language is valuable and worth learning. I'm going to pass it off to Armando.
Yes, thank you, Violet. So we now know what it takes to revitalize a language. And but when we think about language revitalization and language renormalization and language reclamation, we can think sometimes very, very, very different goals and very different scales. We have large scale projects that target country or community wide efforts to reverse language shift, the influence of dominant languages, colonial languages, and they require lots of funding, lots of resources, lots of people, government support. We're talking about large scale programs, changes in language policy and planning. And it takes a lot of effort. However, it is possible, it has been done. And if that's your calling, that's where you stand, by all means, go for it. And the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, which, as Violet mentioned, we're still in, is the perfect time for to push for them and to talk about the need for these large scale efforts. However, uh, to most of us in this room, probably smaller scale efforts on the individual level, at family level, at very local level. That is where we can start acting. And everything starts in the home and can later expand to community centers, schools, or other spaces. And these small scale efforts are achievable without lots of resources or official support. And we're going to talk about some of these approaches. So we talked about input and receiving input. So when we think about lots of input in language acquisition, we often think about immersion education. This is the gold standard that we tend to think about when we think about a language being revitalized. So immersion education is an education program in mostly or entirely the language that is being revitalized. So with little to no input from colonial or the dominant language. And it can be at any level of education, can be in kindergarten, primary school, secondary school, adult education, or university. Um, and they fall more in larger scale revitalization programs. And they take lots of planning, people, and resources, but they can be possible. And we have had cases of uh, immersion programs that have developed within already schools that are non-immersion, that they develop an immersion track and that they have grown from that. Uh, Not that case, but I want to talk a little bit about the Kekula o Navajio o Kalanioku and the Big Island of Hawaii. There are many Hawaiian language immersion schools across Hawaii, but this one specifically is K-12 immersion school from primary school to high school. And I want to talk a little bit about it because it is a really interesting example of curriculum development. I'm linking a panel in which they talk about their approaches for introducing English and other languages in the curriculum via Hawaiian. And they also do a lot of initiative for Hawaiian medium outreach in terms of Hawaiian language reclamation. For example, Hawaiian medium school theater productions that they do participate in the Keaka Hawaiian Language Theater Festival, along with the University of Hawaii at Hilo, University of Hawaii at Manoa, and so on and so forth. But like I said, these kind of immersion schools often take a lot of planning, people, and resources. Uh, Something that many of you may already be familiar with, that is at a smaller scale, are language nests. How many of you in the chat have learned of know what a language nest is? So language nests, I see a few thumbs up. Language nests are a kind of immersion program for the very young. So for babies, very small children, it is basically a daycare in which children are exposed. All the input that they receive is in the language being revitalized. Uh, they are often compared to grandma's house. It is a place for kids to start their lives surrounded by the language. And the beautiful thing about it is that, as Violet mentioned earlier, kids are very sensitive also to language ideologies, and language nests are can be these examples. It are can be these contexts in which they can start living in the language and can feel it as a very safe space, and they receive meaningful input, direct input, and they can act as a sort of ripple effect to the rest of the family when they come back home later, to their parents, to their siblings, etc. So we cannot talk about language nests without talking about kohangareo, which is the origin of this approach. They started in 1980s in Aotearoa, New Zealand, as a Maori community-based movement. The first one was started in April 1982, and in 3 years they grew to 300 kohangareo reo. And today there are over 450 with over 9,000 children enrolled. And it is a purely community-based movement. And they later expanded to other communities, is thanks to relationships and knowledge sharing between indigenous communities. So the first community in which uh, language nests were expanded to were the Hawaiian language nests, the Punana. The first one opened in Kauai in 1984, while there was still a ban on Hawaiian medium public education. So 2 years before it was legal to have public education in Hawaiian. Today there are 12 punana across five of the of the islands. So what do we need to start a language nest? First, we need caregivers who know the language, often elders that can talk to the small children, who have the energy to be around small kids the whole day. Uh, Also, more than one would be ideal, so children can hear and see them speaking to each other. Often, some other adults who can do other tasks in the language nest would be ideal as well. We also need children and family, so very young kids whose families are committed to support to supporting language learning, a language nest is not only effort on the caregivers and the children. It is a family based effort in which after children can come back home from grandma's house, uh, parents and siblings also keep learning with them. And this is the beauty of the ripple effect. And of course, we also need a place, house or a community center or any space that where kids can spend the day. So there are many useful resources that you can consult. The First Peoples Cultural Council on the Language Nest Handbook, a talk by one of the co-founders of Ahapuna Naleo, Dr. Larry Kimura, and there's a beautiful dissertation by Eve Okurak Collar on how language nests were started to develop and grew in 10 global communities beyond Aotearoa. But if we want to go to a even smaller scope approach and focusing on adult speakers, because not all not all kinds of acquisition is first language acquisition on very small children. We have then mentor apprentice programs, also called master apprentice programs. These are one-on-one partnerships between a fluent language user or speaker or signers, usually elders, and a very motivated adult learner, someone who wants to pass the language to their kids or wants to teach their language, or very motivated speaker or very motivated person who wants to learn. Sometimes it's not one on one, sometimes it's one on two or one on three. And it's basically on the mentor and apprentice spending time together, doing traditional activities or everyday tasks, going on a walk, cooking, weaving, and learning the language through doing on a very non-formal education. This has a lot of value because in addition to learning the language, this is a great way to strengthen the relationship with your elders. And it does not require much special equipment, just or physical space or money, just time. The model was developed in 1996 in California by Dr. Leanne Hinton and the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival, and was later successfully implemented in First Nation communities in Canada. So I've linked a presentation by Leanne Hinton and the British Columbia Master Apprentice Language Program Handbook that may be useful for many people here. And an example among the First Nations of such a program is the Prairies to Woodlands Indigenous Language Revitalization Circle, which pairs fluent speakers of different Métis languages with learners. It's a really great example of growth because during the pandemic, it did not simply stop. It was adapted into an online format through Zoom. And it also provided training and support to both mentorants and apprentices, like a short series of videos on survival lessons. So apprentices are not uh, demotivated from uh, from or helpless before a session talking with the mentors. So this is an example of how a mentor apprentice program can grow, but it can start with just two people with time. And another example is land-based learning camps. It is learning language. It is learning language on land through group activities, classes, nature walks, weekend or summer camps, based on building relationship within community and gaining cultural knowledge, skills like cooking, um, wayfinding, weaving, all in all in the language. And it can be done with a smallish amount of money and resources. the first Cultural Council also made a beautiful guide on culture camps, which was later translated into Igbo and Spanish by the ELP. And we have here an example of the Nehiawak language experience, who that has also created its own camp guide. But an example that Anna Belou recently talked to us about is the Iasa summer camp in Eboje, Cameroon. This is a beautiful example of a summer camp that started as a very small initiative in 2022 as a 3-day camp for kids who came back during the holidays to the community. And this year in 2025, it served more than 300 kids for 3 weeks. And it focuses more on ocean and coast knowledge and activities. And yeah, and it is a beautiful initiative. Is there anything you want to share about this, more about this, Anna?
Well, it's just a wonderful example of how things can start small and get really big when the community comes together.
Exactly. And beyond these approaches, they can be infinite. If we go back to the questions that Violet posed at the beginning, what is your positionality? What gifts do you have to share? And think about what works best for you, your language, and your community. We have we can go to infinite approaches. Like, we can think, for example, if we start small, we can think about domains of use, like creating domains in your everyday life. For example, a moment of the day or a space in the household where you and your family only speak the language. For example, in the kitchen or when cooking or doing any other kind of activity. Find a one-on-one master apprentice approach on your own, like find or become a mentor and speak only your language for a few hours a week with someone else, or create a small group of people who do culturally important activities once a month where your language is spoken. It can start as a once a month activity and later can grow. The point is starting small and thinking about what works best. Uh, More ideas that involve public use and language landscape, like creating signs for your workplace, your school, your library, making social media content. We linked a past ELP webinar that some of you probably watched last week, or do a project on an interesting aspect of your language and culture that might get others involved in revitalization. For example, if you look at previous ELP LDTC webinars, you might be interested in doing a project on the morphology or the sounds of your language, or on starting to document biocultural knowledge in your language. And that can get others interested in revitalization in your language or documentation. Or you can go creative. Like, many of you recently learned how to use Elan and how to approach Elan files for documentation. Well, why not repurposing those transcriptions into subtitles for videos and learning how to use publicly available subtitling tools like Agisub. I just included also slides from a workshop that we did in LDTC. Or think about traditional stories from your community. You can adapt one into a digital book, into a short play that you can that you or children or people in your community can perform physically or with puppets. Or you can adapt it into an audio narration, into a podcast format, or you can make a stop motion animation. Possibilities are endless. Or if not a traditional story, write a new one. And some of these ideas we have already uh, incorporated them in some LDTC workshops. Violet, you want to talk a little bit about these?
Yeah, sure. So, part of the workshops that LGTC has been putting on recently are focused on creating creative language revitalization materials. So, these are things that you can just share on your own in a small scale with your community, or that can be used in a classroom because teachers need materials to teach. They have enough to do on their plates with teaching, and then on top of that, they're often expected to make the curriculum. So, some things that we've done in these workshops are stop motion animation for traditional stories. So, this is an example, I think this was in Tuvaluan of the creation story of Night and Day. This is also a great resource over here, Bloom Books, that anyone can use. They have a bunch of templates of books that you can rewrite in your language. The downside of this is that they're not necessarily the most culturally relevant with the art styles, but it's very easy and quick to do, and you can share them easily through that website. And then down here, this is a web app called Read Along Studio that was developed for North American Indigenous languages. So it works really well in that context. And if you just type in and then record an audiobook, it will automatically make it into a word by word audiobook. So it's a great tool for people to learn from. But some of these creative materials also serve the benefit of having culturally relevant materials in the language and getting kids and adults interested in their languages. So this Kiribati story down here is a humorous story. Humor can be a great way to get people interested in the language. Animation is a great way for kids to see their language represented on screen. Because again, a lot of kids, they don't see their language represented digitally. They're very interested in digital worlds, and so they lose interest in their language. So it's important to create these spaces where people can see their language online, if that's culturally appropriate, or at least cool. And it's best if it can be a story that is relevant to them or relevant to you. In some of these workshops, we've had people make anti-drinking stories because they were involved in public health. Anything that you have to share with your community, you can make into a language material. Yes, that's Bloom
Exactly.
Library in the chat.
Yes. And at the same time, if you're an outsider linguist or or an aspiring ally, you can also observe what kind of approaches they are already occurring in the community, like Violet mentioned before, and think about what you can. First of all, look and observe. Don't jump to the pool firsthand necessarily, and think about what you can offer to approach. For example, in LDTC workshops, some elders come with stories, and Violet is a really good artist. So for these stop motion animations, she can offer to support with her art. When I first um, when I first learned that the University of Hawaii at Manoa has a theater program, and Dr. And Kumu Hailio'Pua Baker has been helping Hawaiian revitalization with her theater. I wanted to start learning the language and support theater productions from the stage manager standpoint, because that's something that I know how to do. So think about where you can fit, learn and listen, and see what you can offer to the table. And of course, if you need help getting started in any of these approaches, ELP has recently launched the Language Revitalization Learning and Help Center, which is a free online learning resource for people from all around the world working in language revitalization. You can find everything from free learning resources targeted for at communities, educators, allies, and stories from global revitalization programs from and a global directory. You can see a map down below from different experiences, and your program can be included in it. A lot of events and discussion forums where you can build connections to other people around the world. And also, right now, the application process for the Ready to Revitalize course is open, and applications are due next Monday. So if this is something that you're interested in, make sure to apply. And of course, ELP also offers uh, one-on-one help with language revitalization mentors that can offer support and guidance at any stage of revitalization work, from I don't know where to start to we are at this stage. Where can how can we go further in 11 different languages, and you can make a free appointment anytime. And of course, we've talked about different approaches that need that can be accessed, that can be started with little to no funding, but some funding, some compensation is always useful. So, Violet, would you like to talk about this, please?
Sure. So there's a lot of different granting organizations that you can apply to. The first slide here is about documentation work, and the second one is about revitalization specifically. But you can always use a documentation project to meet revitalization goals. You can always kind of fit these into your revitalization goals. Unfortunately, they often require some kind of university affiliation, so you might have to team up with someone to help apply for those grants. One really useful one all over the world is ELDP, the Endangered Language Documentation Project, I believe is what that stands for. And this is a great one. They're a huge funding organization based out of Europe, but they fund things all over the world. The Firebird Foundation funds oral literature documentation, so this is a great way to incorporate culture into your revitalization project. And then there's also government-specific, country-specific organizations. For example, in the US, we have an NSF, National Science Foundation / National Endowment for the Humanities grant that is specifically meant for language documentation that you can apply for. We've also included one here for documentation in the Philippines, since we know a lot of you are joining us from the Philippines. And you'll have the slides later to click on all these links.
Yes. But there are also funding opportunities that are directly targeted at revitalization work, and many of these do not necessarily require university affiliation. There is often smaller amounts of funding targeted at revitalization, but like I said, there's a few. One example is the Foundation for Endangered Languages. They offer smaller grants, but up to $1,000. But like we said before, a lot can be done with $1,000. And applications are open now. So if this is something that you're interested in, go for it. The Endangered Language Fund, they offer they have a grant program specifically for languages spoken by tribes that came in contact with the Lewis and Clark expedition, but the Language Legacies grant is not region specific. So you may look at this fund as well. And the Cultural Survival Indigenous Community Media is an organization that funds and also trains in the development for indigenous language community radio stations and other community media outlets such as newspapers and others. Make sure to check it out. And like documentation, we also have country specific avenues. Like, for example, we've talked, I've mentioned already many times the First Peoples Cultural Council for the First Nations in Canada that has funds projects in specifically in Canada, but has developed very useful guides for language resources. And also, crowdfunding may be an option, like GoFundMe, Kickstarter, these kind of platforms. This is especially for useful for smaller fundraising projects or gathering community support before going for bigger grants. And if you have friends or colleagues and people who can donate from countries that have stronger currencies, please make sure to encourage them to donate because they can be a very good help. And this is just a small section on everything that can be talked about language revitalization. But please make sure to check all these links in this presentation. You will have the access to it later. Make sure to contact Violet or me or uh, LDTC or ELP, and we are open for questions. Let us know. Let us know.
Wonderful. Thank you, Violet and Armando. That was excellent and so informative. We have a bunch of questions from the chat, so I'm just going to go back through and gather those for you. And so the first one, we consider gesture part of revitalization.
Yeah, definitely. Armando, are you taking our university
Yes.
currently has a gesture seminar, so if you wanna.
Yes. So gesture is an interesting case. There are people who do not consider gesture a part of linguistic. I personally and many other people absolutely consider gesture studies a part, an indivisible part of uh, language, and because it is because it is embodied and pragmatic knowledge in a language. And absolutely, part of documenting a language and part of revitalizing a language come can go through understanding meanings of culture specific gestures and all the knowledge that is embodied in them, so that it can be part of your documentation or revitalization approaches.
Awesome. Thank you. Then we have a couple of questions I'm going to pair together. They're very big picture. Could there be a language that's not endangered? And is there a difference between a low resource language and an endangered language?
I would
That's a
say
question for you, Violet.
I would say there is a difference. But they're very related. So there are a lot of factors that make a language endangered. Actually, ELP does a lot of work on this, with the catalog of endangered languages. But some of the factors that make a language endangered, the most important one is intergenerational transmission. So are the children learning the language? Speaker numbers, government support for the language, and discrimination against the language, and resources available in the language are all part of what makes a language endangered. So a language could be endangered, but have lots of resources in it. I think that would be kind of rare. And a language can also be healthy, but not have a lot of resources. But a lack of teaching resources can be a sign that a language might be at risk in the future.
Yes, awesome answer. And then are there languages that aren't endangered? Yes, depending on where you draw that line. English is in great shape. There's really not much danger to English at all. Other really major languages are not facing that problem either. So if you're a Mandarin speaker, don't worry, Mandarin is not going anywhere. Um, then we have
Many of
another
us
question.
many of us, and sorry, Anna, many of us in this room are coming from the perspective of speakers from languages who are not in danger. My mother tongue Spanish, for example, can, even though it may be discriminated in some communities, at a global scale, it is not a language that is losing vitality. So those notions can definitely overlap, but they are not interchangeable.
Yes, definitely. Then we have a question. Do you guys believe that free platforms like Duolingo can be a good option to preserve endangered languages?
I think we can both say something on this one.
Yes.
My thought on not just Duolingo, but other online platforms like language learning apps is that they can be useful for increasing access to a language, but they're not going to produce a new speaker. So you have to kind of balance in your revitalization project depth of learning and broadness of who's getting
Mhm.
access to language learning with your funds. So a mentor apprentice program, for example, only a few people are learning, but they're learning really a lot. With a language learning app, a lot of people get to learn, but they only learn a little bit of the language. So it can be good to increase interest in a language, but you're not going to get new speakers out of that, is my thought.
Exactly. And they can also increase visibility in the language
Mm,
and public awareness of the language. But then again, if we go back to the how meaningful the input is, we go back to the slide on direct input, and you can't get that with with an app the way that you can with someone else speaking the language, or
Very true.
or an approach embodied in cultural practices as well, which
exactly. Yeah.
you can't get with these kinds of apps.
Yes, and here's a related question. So given the quiet digital comeback of some endangered languages, how can we effectively and responsibly use AI, the web, and apps to increase everyday use and visibility and signal that these languages are fully compatible with modern life and opportunities?
The big question.
Ah,
I think it's going to require a lot of discussions within a community on what level of publicness you want the language to have. Some communities might be really uncomfortable with putting language resources out there because they can get taken by these big data companies and then profited off of by big data companies. And it's a big problem. These big companies want to steal language content to better improve their algorithms so that they can sell things back to people. So that is something to consider when you're putting any kind of language materials out there publicly. If you're really worried about that, you can always password protect things for members of the community. There's websites like Mukutu, which is an archiving platform based out of Australia that's specifically meant for Indigenous languages, that is for that purpose. It is providing digital content online, like digital exhibits and things like that, but very private. What do you
and
think about it,
there
Armando?
and absolutely, all of that. And on the matter of AI and large language models, there are communities that are starting to develop models of AI on their own terms without the support of big AI companies. So that might be an option.
That's a good point, yeah.
But
I'm
yeah,
sorry. I'm
no,
working on a project for Cook Islands Maori that is developing AI tools for the language, like subtitling for older people who are losing their hearing, or speech to text for people who can't type. Those kinds of tools, or spell check, uh, things like that can be useful to help people use a language more online and are somewhat more ethical uses of AI, but you also have to consider the environmental impact. So.
absolutely.
Yes, thank y'all. We also have a question, a more specific one. I started a language campaign in nursery schools in Douala, Cameroon, but I'm facing some issues due to the fact that the children are from different linguistic backgrounds. Can you provide strategies for language revitalization in this context? So, contexts where there might be kids from multiple language communities.
Um, this is related to Cameroon, so would you like to talk about this, Anna?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my first response is definitely reach out to one of the ELP mentors, Dr. Pius Akumbu. He's a Cameroonian linguist whose specialization is actually in educational and language policy, language revitalization issues. So he would have a lot to say. But in general, if you're looking at language work in a multilingual setting, right, where kids are coming from different language backgrounds, one of the most important things you can do is foster what some people call critical language awareness. And that sounds very fancy, but it just means creating an environment where children understand that all of their languages are valuable and important and there's space for them in the school setting. So you don't have to focus on teaching one single language. You could do, some teachers do like language potlucks where each kid brings an important phrase or sentence or word in their language to share with the class. You can encourage kids to put up signs in their own languages. They don't have to understand each other's languages, but make space for them to be valued and accepted in the classroom. And that will go a long way towards making an environment where kids feel comfortable using, learning, sharing their language with other kids. Yeah, and especially in Cameroon, as you know, question asker, kids learn each other's languages normally, right? At recess, don't discourage kids from talking their languages with each other. Don't make them all speak French or English. Just let them do what kids do, which is share languages between themselves.
It could also be useful to get the parents involved, get them education about how to encourage language use in their household. All those things we talked about input and encouraging kids to be excited about their language, are all things that you can get the parents involved with in the classroom and at home.
And making sure to talk about all of these places as domains of use in which all these languages can be spoken. So yes.
Absolutely. Oh, and for the person in the chat asking what an LLM is, that is a large language model. So any kind of AI tool you're familiar with that kind of like gives you text, like ChatGPT, that is a large language model. It's basically a thing that guesses the likelihood of the next word in a sentence and gives you a statistically likely sentence, right? So that's sort of what a lot of people mean when they say AI is something that's trained to guess what the next word in a sentence is and give you those sentences. Let's see. We have one more question I think you covered in addition to immersion education. Are there other initiatives you think might work? Yeah, tons, infinite
Infinite.
options. Yes, I think one of the most important lessons in language revitalization is there's not one right path. There are so many different ways that you could do effective revitalization work in your community. So talk to the people around you, see what you have available, get creative, and you will find a way forward. Yes. Any other questions for our wonderful facilitators? Oh, here we go. I am an outsider slash ally linguist looking for a way to contribute my talents. I appreciate the code of conduct. Any advice for finding projects or initiatives to join if I'm not currently affiliated with a university?
Oh, I can think of one thing. There's this really excellent conference over the summer called Colang, and it's happening again this summer. And it's a conference, it's like a 2-week workshop conference for linguists and language workers, and members of Indigenous communities who are looking to get involved in language to all get together, and talk about how to best support their languages. And so that's a great opportunity to meet people who are looking for help on their projects. Any other ideas?
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking calling.
Yeah. Yes, it is in Reno. Yes.
Yes, definitely co-sign, check out Colang. They also sometimes have scholarships available. So if there's financial hardship, try applying for a scholarship. I don't know if they're still open, but it's worth a shot. Uh,
Yeah, it is rather
Another thing,
expensive.
it is. So if you don't have a university department who can pay your tuition, see about scholarships. Um, Another thing that we frequently suggest is where do you live and what languages are
Mm.
spoken where you live? Is there a local tribal language committee? And could you reach out and say, I'm willing to do whatever you need done? Because this doesn't often look like, especially for outsiders, what's needed isn't somebody to do language work per se. It's like we need somebody to cook for the gathering on Saturday. We need somebody to give this elder a ride. We need somebody to help organize these files. So just show up and be ready to do whatever needs doing and you are asked to do is a really good way to get started. Just you got a pair of hands and a brain. What can it do for people?
And even in cases in which we're not talking about indigenous language revitalization in a place, we can think about fostering language access for diaspora speakers in a community that is close to the place where you live. That is where a lot of meaningful work can start.
And I will also say that while we're sort of developing it out right now, ELP does have a volunteer interest form. I think I'm going to type in the right link. Let me know if that doesn't work. But if you are interested in contributing your time and skills in some way to supporting language revitalization, please feel free to sign up and we will reach out to you with opportunities to get involved with ELP or perhaps with specific programs that have requested help. Right. I see a question. Can you get a copy of the recording? Yes, everybody here will get a copy of the recording in your email. And no, Colang is not online, unfortunately. That is an in-person institute, which is part of what makes it so special. It's really nice to be in the same place as other people, but for online stuff, keep an eye on ELP's social media and our events calendar. We do share events that are happening all over the world, as well as online. And I'll drop a link to that in the chat. All right. Any other questions? I see some great suggestions from Paula for other organizations that offer support and programs. And I see a request for the Ready to Revitalize application link, so I'll put that in the chat here. Okay. Any other last questions before I get to a few final administrative notes? No? Well, let's have another big round of applause for Armando and Violet. Thank you. This was a wonderful session. Really informative and really helpful. And it
Thank you
looks
all
like,
for coming and thank you for your great questions.
Thank you so
yes.
much.
Yes, and thanks to all of you for another wonderful language documentation series this year. This was our biggest one ever, believe it or not. More than 900 people registered this year. So thanks everybody for coming from all over the world to be here and learn with us this year. It was wonderful. And Violet and Armando have shared their emails. If you have further questions for them, you are welcome to write, and you're always invited to get in touch with the ELP Language Revitalization mentors. They are really knowledgeable and kind and helpful people. And then I will stop the recording here for a couple of administrative details. So